What's up, guys? Welcome back to Classic Octane. I am Taylor. So we are waiting for some parts to come in for the CB350 build. We're just about done. Basically, I'm just waiting for signals and the brake light to come in, and then I can kind of final mount the rear fender. And I will be doing an overview of this bike when it's done to kind of show you guys what I did. It was a pretty light build, just a little bit of custom touches and kind of cleaning up some of the stock stuff to get it just being a really fun little cruise around town bike. Again, I'll cover more of that when it's done here in the next couple of days. So what I want to do is go ahead and take this opportunity to transition back to the CB500 restoration we're doing. In the last video, you saw me get this engine running on the stand. Now that we know that engine's running, I need to get the frame prepped for it to go into it. So what I want to do is just wheel this thing outside and pressure wash off all of this caked on dirt and dust, and just basically get the frame and everything as clean as I can. Then we can go in here and get rid of this little bit of like surface rust occasionally around on the frame. Get rid of that, give it a nice coat of satin black paint so it matches the OEM paint. I'll show you guys which paint I use when the time comes. And once that's all cleaned up, then we're ready for basically reassembly. We can prepare to get this engine. I do want to go ahead and paint this engine as well. So while we have the bike outside pressure washing, we'll probably go ahead and pressure wash off the engine, which I've shown in the past before. I'm going to go ahead and take the carbs off, and we'll block some of the passages and stuff to make sure we don't get water on the inside. Obviously protect our points and that kind of stuff. Just clean that up to be able to give it a nice coat of silver paint as well, so it'll match our nice clean frame. So let's go ahead and get this thing down off the lift, push it out in the driveway, get to cleaning. Got the bike pushed outside up on the center stand, and then I have soaked everything down with Zep heavy duty degreaser. It's what I always use for my bikes. It works really well. It's pretty aggressive, so you're not going to want to let it sit on like raw aluminum parts or anything for too long. But basically I spray the bike down, let it sit for 5 or 10 minutes, hit it with the pressure washer, and it you know, gets a lot of kind of caked on gunk. Sometimes with engines you'll have to do it, you know, 2, sometimes even 3 times if they're really caked on. But since this is mostly just dirt and dust and stuff that's caked on here, I would imagine it's all going to come off in one go. So I coated every inch down that I could. We're going to spray it all off. Then I'll probably pull my air hose out here and blow off the majority of it, make sure all the electronics and stuff are kind of blown out. They're all waterproof. These are motorcycles designed to be ridden in the rain, but if I can kind of prevent some sitting water in there, we'll do that. So I'll let this sit for a little bit, grab the electric pressure washer, spray it all down. All cleaned off, and I just blew it all off with the air hose. Now I'm going to wheel it back inside, take a little microfiber and just wipe down a couple of the little, you know, water kind of running off spots, and just have it be nice and clean. And then we can really start to determine you know, where all these little rust spots are. You can see this little spot right here where I just took my little air grinder or die grinder with a little kind of stripping disc on it, something that won't strip away the metal but is enough to strip away the paint and the rust, just to kind of see. This is about the deepest spot I could find on the bike, and it seems to clean up real nicely, so I'm pretty happy with that. We will continue to disassemble this bike a little bit further, just because I want to make sure, you know, all of the bearings are good and everything is nice and greased. And since this bike has sat for so long, want to go through everything. Obviously we'll be replacing tires and that kind of stuff, but I just wanted to clean it off a little bit more to get a nice starting point for the next step. We'll probably be pulling the center stand off and sandblast that and repaint it because it's got a good amount of rust on it, and just kind of continue to go through. We won't need these pannier mounts anymore since we're not going to be putting those back on the bike, But overall, I'm still very happy with the condition of this bike. So I'm gonna push this back inside, and then I'm gonna go ahead and degrease and clean off the engine while I have everything set up out here. And then I'll bring you guys back when we start to dive into this a little bit further. I figured I'd give you guys some nice close-ups of the frame so you can see how nicely everything cleaned up. I mean, 98% of this frame is in really good shape. And that's part of the reason why I didn't think it was necessary to strip it all the way down and like strip the frame and redo it completely. Because most of it is nicer than, you know, you're definitely nicer than you would expect for a bike of this age. So what I'm going to do now is remove a couple of things like I mentioned a few minutes ago, panniers, the, you know, extra mounts and anything that we're not going to be using. And then I'm going to start to go through and basically clean up any of the rusty spots with like a wire wheel. I have like a little brass wire wheel, or my little stripping disc I mentioned. I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. This is the little stripping disc I'm talking about. I have a bunch of these, like 2 and 3 inch. They're designed to strip off paint, so they work really well stripping off a little bit of rust, getting us down to nice clean metal so that I can paint it. The paint I like to use, and some of you have heard me mention this in the past, it's VHT roll bar and chassis paint. This, it goes on really nicely, and it seems to last really well too. So the paint on my Triumph hardtail frame is all that paint. A couple of years old now. You know, a couple thousand miles of riding, and it all looks great. I'm really happy with how durable it is, and I'm convinced that for out of a spray can, it's probably the best paint you can get for this application, and it matches the factory paint really well. So I have the satin black. This paint, you know, it is actually a little bit glossy in some areas, so we'll try it with the satin black. If the satin is too satin, they do make a gloss in that same exact paint that I believe I have a can of as well. So we can try the two and see which one matches perfectly. But as you can see, like this part of the frame back here is pretty satin. So it should match pretty well. Frame touch-up paint is all done. You can see the area where that rust spot was before. Matches all in nicely. You can also take like the cap and spray a little bit of paint in there, and take a small brush, and that lets you get like really into the tiny little nitty-gritty areas and little cracks and crevices, just to, you know, make sure it's all nice and coated, touch up any nicks and stuff that the bike's accumulated over the last 50 years. I think it looks really great. So the next thing I want to move on to is probably the engine. So I did go ahead and degrease it. Now I'm going to take the exhaust off, take some of these shinier covers off, basically get it ready to give this thing a nice coat of silver engine enamel. The paint I'm going to use is this Duplicolor engine enamel, so ceramic coating, or with ceramic it says. This is the aluminum color. I've painted a few engines, and it matches really nicely with the original finish. I actually kind of tested it on this side of the engine over here, where you can see where it looks nice in this little corner. That's because I painted that. So the idea is that we don't want that thing to be just one solid block of silver. We do want to keep some of the contrasting of different materials and that kind of stuff as well. So I'll pull that off, I'll give that a coat of paint, and I kind of update you guys as I make progress on that. The next thing I need to do is really get some parts on the way for this thing. So I need to order some tires. I already have a replacement chain. I already have a battery. I already have the master cylinder and caliper rebuild kits. So we probably actually don't need that many parts. I need to check and see how the fork seals are. I do plan on, at a minimum, changing the oil in the fork tubes, but if the seals need to be done, I have to check and see if I have some of those. So basically just giving the bike a good once over to see what's in usable condition, what's not, and get any necessary parts on the way. So the other thing I want to update you guys on is I've been working on this gas tank. This is the factory tank, if you remember, and it was full of rust, like probably the worst I've ever seen, which is pretty unfortunate because obviously I want to keep this gas tank if at all possible. So I've gone through and I did run it through probably 72 hours of a kind of rust converter from Cream. How do you say this? K-R-E-E-M, this tank prep stuff. And it did a pretty good job, but I'm gonna need to go a little bit further. So I think I'm actually going to try Evapo Rust, which I've used in the past, just to try and get it, as close to a good metal finish as we can. Then we can coat the inside. So I'm still working on this. I will update you guys as I make progress. I haven't bothered yet just because it's not done. So I haven't figured out the exact combination to bring a gas tank back that's this far gone. Show you guys real quick. I did go ahead and give the engine a coat of the aluminum paint, aluminum color enamel paint. Started to polish the starter cover, the clutch cover, so that looks nice and shiny. And then this is like a satin but still kind of polished aluminum, not painted, for the clutch cover. And then the points cover is like a chrome finish too, so that all should match really nicely with the vapor blasted carbs, which have some lightly polished, some kind of matte gray color. Should look really good and close to OE. This color is honestly, it's probably a little bit on the bright side from what the OE bikes have, but I think it'll look pretty good, especially when it gets just a little bit of riding, road debris or dust on it. It won't look as kind of shiny, which will probably match everything else pretty well. So it may not look like it, but we are actually kind of going onto the home stretch of this, because in the next video, I should be able to put this engine back in the frame, start to kind of button it all back up. I do have a tire on the way. I already had a front tire in my stash that's going to be perfect, and I already had tubes, but I did not have a matching rear tire, so that should be here next week and we can get those knocked out. Once the engine's back in the frame, we can do all the stuff like the chain and start to actually put this thing all the way back together. There's still a few things we need to figure out. I mentioned the gas tank earlier. What I'm going to do with that is still kind of yet to be determined. Also need to do, like a little repair on the seat, and there's still a good amount of work, but I'm really happy with the progress we've made on this thing so far. So that's where I'm going to call it on this one. It's been like a week since I put out a video, so I want to go ahead and get an update out for you guys. The next video is going to be a walk around of the CB350 project. This is a customer bike that is 99% done. I'm just waiting for some lights and stuff to come in for me to finish this build, and I will be doing a kind of walkthrough to show you guys everything that I've done to this bike. I'm really excited with how it's turning out. It's going to be a super fun bike to ride for sure. So I want to also take this last moment to thank my Patreon supporters. I basically never mention my Patreon, but I'm going to start doing it. It's one of my kind of New Year's resolutions is to start to push that a little bit more, because ideally we can get to the point where YouTube is my kind of full-time income, and we can really get into some crazy projects if I'm not having to do a lot of customer bikes and that kind of stuff as well. So we can get more into the crazy custom stuff and stuff that's probably a little bit more exciting for the average person to watch. But until then, we're going to keep knocking out as many bikes as we possibly can. I really do appreciate everyone's support. So go look in the link in the description for my Instagram, my Patreon, all that kind of stuff, if any of that interests you. And I'll see you guys in the next one.